Well, I see you have arrived. I admire your courage. And who am I? Just think of me as your very own personal ghost host. I'm here to tuck you in tonight. So, lock your windows and doors, look in your closet and under your bed, and hold your blankets tight, and prepare for 6 terrifyingly true ghost stories. Our first story of the night, I'm sure, will fuel your nightmares. It's about someone that has an experience in her home that can only be described as pure terror. We call it, I spent the night in a haunted house, and this happened.
It was a bitterly cold night in 2018 when I moved into an old, weathered house deep in the countryside. The kind of house where the nearest neighbor was miles away, and the nights were so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat. This place had a reputation in the nearby village. People whispered that it was haunted, but I dismissed it as just another old wives' tale meant to scare off city folk like me. The first few nights passed uneventfully. The house was drafty, the floors creaked with every step, but nothing out of the ordinary happened. That was until the 5th night, when everything changed. I was settled in the living room, reading by the dim light of a single lamp. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but I paid it no mind, absorbed in my book. Suddenly, a faint scratching noise broke the silence, coming from the ceiling above me. I paused, listening intently, but the sound ceased as abruptly as it had begun. I chalked it up to a rat or some other small creature, though unease began to creep in. But then, the scratching returned, louder this time, as if nails were being dragged across wood. I stood up, my heart beginning to race. The scratching moved, traveling from the ceiling to the walls, circling the room. It was as if something was trapped behind the wallpaper, desperately trying to break free. Panic set in, but I fought to stay calm. I grabbed a broom and banged it against the wall, shouting, "Get out! Get out of here!" The noise stopped, and the house fell into an oppressive silence. I took a deep breath, convinced it was over, but then the lights flickered and the temperature in the room plummeted. I could see my breath in the air, forming a mist. The rancid odor that followed was unbearable, like rotting meat. The stench was overwhelming, making me gag. I covered my nose, but the smell seemed to seep into my skin, clinging to me. I stumbled back, my eyes watering, and that's when I saw it. In the darkest corner of the room, something was moving. At first, it was just a shape, a dark mass growing, stretching toward me. As it came closer, I saw it was a figure, tall and twisted, with long, gnarled limbs and eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. It moved with unnatural speed, closing the distance between us in seconds. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move as it reached out with one bony hand, its fingers ending in sharp black claws. The creature's face was inches from mine now, its breath hot and putrid against my skin. It grinned, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and whispered in a voice that was both a hiss and a growl.
You shouldn't have come here.
The room spun, and I felt myself being pulled into the darkness, into the creature's cold, unrelenting embrace. I fought to stay conscious, but it was like being drowned in ink, suffocating and cold. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sound of my own heartbeat, pounding in my ears. When I woke up the next morning, I was on the floor, the room filled with sunlight. The creature was gone, but the smell lingered faintly. My body ached, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw deep red scratches down my arms and neck, as though I had been clawed by something. I couldn't stay in that house another night. I packed my things and left, not caring where I went as long as it was far from that place. I never discovered what that creature was or why it targeted me, but I know one thing for certain. I'll never forget those glowing eyes or the pure, unrelenting terror that accompanied them. To this day, I still feel like something is watching me, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. And I'm terrified that next time, I might not be able to escape.
Wow, that ghost sounds like he was a real dick. But hey, at least you got out of there in one piece. Next we have one from an OP that had several experiences growing up. It's called My Paranormal Experiences.
I've had a few experiences over the years. The most terrifying ones were in this house I lived in from the age of about 9 or 10 until I was 16. I shared a room with my older sister at the time. It was quite a large room. We both had single beds. Mine was directly opposite the bedroom door on the left side of the room. Hers was on the opposite side of the room but facing the same direction. One night, I was woken up in the middle of the night by something physically poking me behind my left ear twice. I always slept on my right side, and saying,
"Hello, hello."
I woke up all blurry-eyed and looked at the end of my bed to see a figure standing there. I hid under the covers, absolutely terrified, for maybe about 20 to 30 seconds, and eventually mustered up the courage to take another look. I pulled back the covers to then see the figure had moved and was now standing at the end of my sister's bed. At that point I hid back under the covers, and I think I just passed out from fear. I could still feel the pressure behind my ear from where I had been poked when I woke up in the morning. After that experience I was not able to sleep with my ear out of the covers until I was nearly an adult, even for a couple years after I moved out of that house, because I was so scared it would happen again. I didn't tell anyone at the time, but I told my sister a few years ago, and she admitted to me that she had also woken up once in that room to see someone standing over me. There was a couple more experiences in that house. Another one was the first night my mum ever left me alone in the house. This was after my siblings had moved out and gone to uni. I was upstairs in my room when all of a sudden I hear my dog, who rarely barked, start barking downstairs. I come out my room and look down the stairs to see the front door wide open, and my dog just stood there barking at it. I go down to close it and take a look outside to see no one even close by, and no one had come in the house. Apparently the woman who lived in that house previous to us had passed away there, and I imagine our bedroom was likely where she passed. I've had a few more experiences in recent years and in different houses. Shortly after my gran, my dad's mum, passed 3 years ago, I woke up one night for seemingly no reason. I only ever wake up in the middle of the night if I need the toilet or if someone physically wakes me, and this was a house I rented with a friend. I opened my eyes and saw someone stood there. It didn't scare me, and I shut my eyes not thinking much of it, then thought to myself, hang on, opened my eyes again and they were still there. I blinked, still there, so I turned my lamp on and then they vanished. I'm sure it was my gran. I wasn't scared at all, and the figure was her height and build. I was also woken up around the same time to someone gently touching my hand. Again, I'm sure it was her. My gran and I were so close. She passed during COVID, from cancer, and 2 days before her funeral I caught COVID and wasn't allowed to attend, which was horrible. I wrote something for the funeral celebrant to read on my behalf and had to watch on livestream. I felt so guilty I couldn't be there even though it was out of my control, and I think those experiences were just her letting me see her one last time and telling me it was okay. I've dreamt of her once since then. I know she's always looking after me just as she did when she was alive. Also, after my nan, my mum's mum, died around 6 months after my gran, I went to go stay at my mum's one night. This was a few days after she brought some of her ashes home, and the living room light flickered when I walked in the room. This had also happened when my brother had gone round one night and for my mother, and had only ever happened since her ashes were brought home. I also saw a dog toy move completely by itself the same night the light flickered. Again, I'm sure it was my nan just letting us know she was there, and she was okay. I miss both of my grandmothers very much.
Man, I'm kinda surprised you got any kind of sleep growing up. Ghost always waking you up and such. Our next tale is from a young man that had a bit of a unique encounter. We call it Candy Wrappers and Eternity.
When I was a child, my world was filled with fleeting movement, quick flashes darting in the periphery, or more sinister entities that lingered, seemingly reveling in my fear. They felt so real, but no one believed me when I spoke of the Shadow Man, the Wispy Man, or the head with the slow-mo voice. As a result, I became the weird kid, the one who seemed perpetually on edge, out of step with everyone else. The kid who did strange, unsettling things, yearning for a sliver of attention in a world that dismissed him because of who he was and the things he said. I got my vindication one day, on a cloudy, humid afternoon, the kind of typical midsummer day you'd expect in southwest Missouri. I was off by myself as usual, sitting on my beloved swing. The wooden swing sat beneath a pergola-style canopy. Its slatted roof casted dappled shadows on the ground below. Built by my grandpa, it cradled too comfortably, with a smooth backrest and gentle armrest that invited quiet moments of reflection. Sturdy, angled beams held the structure steady, while the natural wood grain of the bench felt soft, almost like a cushion. It was my favorite spot in the garden, a rustic haven where time seemed to slow and the world softened, where no one laughed at me or judged me. I was eating Starburst, my hands covered in sticky dirt. I unwrapped piece after piece from the package, popping them into my mouth and tucking them into my cheeks like a macaque, maneuvering each one out to chew when I was ready. As I was swinging and chewing, I noticed a figure emerging from Route 5, the state road that served as the border of my grandpa's front yard. He moved closer and closer, but I felt no fear. Instead, I sat transfixed by how the sunlight seemed to pass through him and around him. As he approached, I could see he was old, at least old to me at the time. His gaze is forever burned into my memory, even 30-some years later. His face was etched with the rugged lines of age and hard work, each crease a testament to years spent in the elements. His eyes, set deep beneath a furrowed brow, held a stern, contemplative gaze. His thin lips were set in a straight line, neither a frown nor a smile, but something more serious and introspective. A dusting of gray hair peeked out from under a straw hat, wide-brimmed and well-worn. He wore a plaid shirt in red and blue, the fabric slightly faded and softened from wear. The shirt was tucked neatly into a pair of blue overalls, sturdy and utilitarian, with thick straps buckled over his shoulders. His attire and countenance painted the picture of a man who had long been acquainted with the land, perhaps a farmer, like my grandpa, I thought. There was a familiarity to him that made me like him immediately. He sat down beside me without a word, not even acknowledging my presence at first. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, staring intently at what seemed to me nothing more than alfalfa in the hayfield gently swaying in the breeze. Beyond that lay the fence that separated my grandpa's field from Mr. Grant's, a rather unfriendly man who would fuss whenever I wandered to the fence line to watch his ostriches. Finally, he turned to look at me, twisting his thin lips into an unnatural smile. Then he asked me for one. As I handed it to him, his unnatural smile widened ever so slightly. His weathered eyes, squinting and creased from years and the harsh sun, briefly opened wider, revealing a glimmer of unexpected joy as he accepted it. He popped it into his mouth without unwrapping it, then went back to staring straight ahead, lost once more in the hayfield as if desperately searching for something. The air grew heavy with a palpable tension, and I felt an all-too-familiar lump forming in my throat as I swallowed hard. "Mister, you're supposed to unwrap it first," I quietly said. The silence lingered for a moment longer before he turned his gaze back toward me. His smile now seemed almost sinister. His eyes grew unnaturally dark, and his hands fidgeted in front of him, rubbing together. As he spoke, the sky seemed to darken a little, and he loomed over me, growing larger somehow. I peed a little. Staring deep into my eyes, he said,
"They are always better that-a-way. You spoil them when you peel them."
Standing up from the swing, he added,
"If they give you a hard time about not peeling them, you tell them your old Uncle Walt will have to pay them a visit."
With that, he slowly ambled back toward the state road, laughing loudly and muttering to himself. I watched as he grew smaller and smaller, too afraid to move until he was completely out of sight. My legs numb and my body shaking with fear, I jumped from the swing I would never sit in again and ran to the house, stumbling and falling 3 times along the way. Bursting into the dining room where my grandparents and great-aunt were having their coffee, I was nearly bawling. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted and gasping for breath. My grandma rushed to my side, grabbing me by the shoulders. "What the heck has got into you, boy?" she demanded, her voice sharp with concern. Looking into her eyes, not daring to look away, I told her everything. I still remember the look of confused fear on her face when I described him with a detail and clarity that I shouldn't have been capable of at such a young age. As I revealed who he claimed to be, her face blanched, the color draining away as if she had seen a ghost. "Go to your room," she said. Walking slowly to my room, I sank down onto my bed, laying there for what felt like forever, running the story over and over in my head. I felt guilty, as if I had done something wrong. I knew I hadn't. So why had they sent me away? I asked myself. As I stewed, trying to make sense of it all, I finally heard my grandpa call for me. "Adam, get in here." Rushing to the dining room, I sat in the chair, my heart pounding. My grandpa looked at me sternly. "Are you sure that's what this man looked like in what he said?" "Yes, sir," I replied, my voice trembling. He sighed deeply, his eyes searching mine. "Adam, your great-uncle Walt passed away 10 years ago, 1 year before you were even born. I never saw the old ghost again, and to this day, I never eat Starburst, peeled or unpeeled. The movement out of the corner of my eye has never ceased, however, and sometimes I'll hear whispers from another place, a place where removing candy wrappers is frowned upon and old farmers forever search the horizon for an end to their eternity."
Well, I can see why you never sat on that swing again. I mean, you did say that you peed on it. But anyway, you never ate Starburst again? So you never found out if your Uncle Walt was right about eating them, wrapper and all. Next, we have a woman who just moved into a house and almost immediately strange stuff started happening. We call it, something is really wrong with our new house.
Okay, so this happened 2 nights ago. I awoke suddenly and saw it was 3 a.m. The house was super quiet and I was by myself since my hubs was at work. I rubbed my eyes, convincing myself it was just another restless night. But as I settled back into bed, a strange feeling washed over me, and it wasn't because I binge-watched Ghost Encounters. I looked around the dimly lit room. Then I heard a soft whisper, barely audible, but distinct enough to send chills down my spine. I sat up, straining to listen. It seemed to be coming from the hallway. And I began sweating profusely. I mean, my PJs were soaked. "Hello?" I called out, no answer. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but curiosity tugged at me since I was alone. I put my legs over the side of the bed and stood up, but still under the comforter. As I crept down the hallway, the whisper grew clearer, and I noticed a light down the hall toward the living room. My heart raced, and I literally thought I was going to have a heart attack. I had to breathe because my mouth was turning into cotton mouth. I turned the corner. In the darkness of the corner by the lamp stood a dark shadow figure. Sweat began dripping off my arm, down my back, even my hair was wet. I could barely breathe, frozen in place. The whispers were barely noticeable, but it seemed to say, "Help me." I was so scared I was frozen and drenched in sweat. It suddenly moved toward my nanny's old mirror hanging on the wall. My heart pounded in my chest, and I stumbled back, falling backwards into the hallway onto the floor. My comforter stuck and intertwined between my legs, my arms unable to move, and my knees were numb. I crawled back to my room so fast I have bruises all over my knees and shins. I don't think I ever moved that fast. I jumped back into my bed under the covers and unable to get the courage to change out of my wet clothing. I stayed under the covers until daylight and called out of work because of the lost sleep. I don't know what to do. This is the first paranormal encounter at my house, and I had to share this one. We just moved into this house 1 month ago. Any suggestions? I'm literally terrified to the core. I'm also going to see about putting up some cameras.
Well, You know, you should have at least changed into some dry clothes. I mean, you could have caught pneumonia and ended up being something like me. Our next one comes from someone that moves into a house in what they call one of the most haunted towns in the United States and seems so surprised when they discover that their house is haunted. This story is called... That isn't her voice, is it?
I lived in one of the top 10 most haunted towns in the United States for a little over 6 years. Paranormal experiences activity was to be expected. We'd moved in when I was around the age of 16. Me, my mother, my brother, including his wife and daughter. The house was old, but you couldn't exactly tell at first glance, but it felt suffocating at times, and certain parts of it certainly gave it away. Whilst my mother took the room across the hall beside my niece, my brother and his wife took the room in the garage on the other end of the building, which left me with the largest room. After living there for some time, I discovered through the neighbor's kid, who was my age, that there was an eerie history behind the home, especially my own bedroom. He'd told me that he had been good friends with the boy and his father, who had previously resided there, including how the father became a paranoid man and in the process of doing so had locked up the attic until it was inaccessible for anyone or anything to get up there again. He'd also informed me on the crawl space in my closet behind the door that didn't have a handle on the inside. So if you got stuck during a game of hide and seek, there was no getting out unless someone came to find you. After about 6 months, the activity begun to pick up like no tomorrow. Between shadows, the feeling of someone sitting beside you as you slept, voices, footsteps running at you down the hallways, our dogs barking at a corner in a dark room, or even seeing the top of a head peek up at you from the end of your bed late at night, it was never ending. We had a feeling it was to do with the spaces my friend had told me about, and we knew deep down that he'd been right about it alongside the circumstances of living in such an old area that was known for its reputable hauntings. One night, I decided to go out around 2 in the morning for a quick snack in the kitchen. Everyone had their doors shut and had been asleep for hours at that point in time. From my room into the long hallway, I soon entered through the living room, which sat on my left side, with my headphones on, blasting a few videos to ease my own mind. While I finished up, I heard a faint voice calling out to me from the pitch-black confines of the living room, pulling my head set down to listen before putting them back on as I hadn't heard anything else and blamed it on my imagination. Only seconds later, I hear my mother's voice clearly call out in a sickeningly sweet voice, and I froze entirely in retaliation to the sound. It didn't sound right, and I knew that wasn't my mother. Instead, I ignored it until it called out once more in a multitude of aggravation. Turning my volume up, my pores had flared into a cacophony of chills that froze me to the spot. I knew not to respond, to give it what it wanted, and so I kept my head down, whilst my feet carried me over to the left side of the wall in which I used to silently but quickly escape to my room. It was deathly still, and I could feel something watching me until I'd arrived back to my room and locked my door behind me. For the rest of that night, my eyes stayed locked on that handle until my actual mother had woken up and allowed me to get some rest for the first time in hours. There had been many occurrences over that period, but that one in itself had chilled me to the bones more than most of the others had. I no longer live there and have received my own place a few hours away. Haven't had anything happen since.
Wow, that's a hell of a thing, ain't it? Our last story for the night is about a guy that goes off for a run in the woods and feels like he may not be alone. We call this one, Something Running Behind Me During Sports Practice.
For context, this took place between a field and a forest. I was practicing for cross country, and as I was on my last 2 laps, I heard someone running behind me. No one. Now I know people are going to say, but wasn't that just your own footstep? I am certain it was another person. When I stopped to check behind me for a second time, the footsteps seemed to be delayed before they stopped. After I finished my run, I didn't hear the footsteps for the rest of the day, but it still creeped me out. Some additional background knowledge if it helps. I've had what I believe to be a ghost encounter before, a random cold spot at my grandparents' house, and to top that off, random old toys going off right after me and a cousin, asked the ghost to give us a sign. Note, I was like 5 at the time. Another thing is that my house sometimes seems haunted. Random doors shutting, random knocks on the second-story window at night, and even footsteps in the attic. It's most likely just building noises that can be debunked, though.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe the ghost was just curious to where you were going in such a hurry. Maybe he thought you were being chased by someone and just wanted to make sure you were okay. Sort of like an undead concerned citizen. Or maybe he just thought you were not running fast enough and thought, hey, I bet you'll run faster if you're being chased by a ghost. That was some scary stuff tonight, wasn't it? But do you know what is not scary? Hitting like, subscribe, and sharing this video. It'll really help us keep the ghosts at bay. And of course, if any of you have a story to share, then by all means, drop me a line in the comments. But I do want to thank you for stopping by, and I hope the stories we told won't be giving you too many bad dreams. But if they do, then maybe you shouldn't run from them. After all, sometimes it's better to embrace your nightmares